My bike broke down. Can you help? Those 7 words, spoken by a young rider on a dusty California highway, would change 2 lives forever. He had no idea who he was asking, and the old man in the worn leather jacket had no idea that this moment would remind him why he started building motorcycles 60 years ago. The afternoon sun hung low over Route 66, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Heat waves rose from the cracked asphalt like ghosts dancing in the shimmer. It was the kind of day when sensible people stayed indoors, when the air conditioning hummed in diners and gas stations, when only the truly devoted dared to ride. Marcus Chen was 23 years old, fresh out of community college with a degree in mechanical engineering and a dream that burned brighter than the California sun. He had saved every penny from his part-time job at the auto parts store, skipped vacations, eaten ramen noodles for 2 years straight, all to buy his first real motorcycle. Not just any motorcycle, a vintage 1972 Titan Eagle, the legendary machine that had revolutionized American motorcycle design and inspired a generation of riders. The bike had cost him $8,000, which was everything he had. The seller, an elderly widow whose husband had passed away the previous spring, had looked at Marcus with knowing eyes when he came to pick it up. She had seen something in him, she said. The same fire that had burned in her husband's eyes when he first rode that machine off the showroom floor 50 years ago. Marcus had promised her he would take care of it. He had promised he would honor its legacy. And for 3 glorious months he had kept that promise, riding through the canyons and coastlines of Southern California, feeling the wind against his face, understanding for the first time why his grandfather had always called motorcycles freedom machines. But now, on this scorching afternoon in the middle of nowhere, with the nearest town 20 miles in either direction, the Titan Eagle had betrayed him. The engine had sputtered, coughed, and died, leaving Marcus stranded on the shoulder of the highway with nothing but his thoughts and the relentless sun. He checked his phone. No signal. He checked his water bottle. Almost empty. He checked the engine, running through every diagnostic procedure he had learned in school, but nothing made sense. The spark plugs were fine. The fuel line was clear. The carburetor seemed to be functioning properly. Yet the bike refused to start, sitting there like a stubborn mule that had decided it was done walking for the day. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked down the empty highway. In the distance, he could see a small structure, perhaps a gas station or a roadside stand. It was at least a mile away, maybe more. The heat was brutal, the kind that could knock a man down if he was not careful. But he had no choice. He would have to push the bike. He was about to start the long walk when he heard it. The unmistakable rumble of a motorcycle engine, low and powerful, coming from somewhere behind him. He turned and squinted into the glare, watching as a single headlight emerged from the heat waves like a mirage taking solid form. The motorcycle that approached was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was clearly custom-built, a masterpiece of chrome and steel that seemed to flow rather than simply exist. The rider was an older man, perhaps in his 70s, with a weathered face that told stories of 1,000 roads traveled. He wore a simple leather jacket, faded by decades of sun and wind, and his eyes, behind a pair of vintage aviator goggles, held the kind of wisdom that only comes from a lifetime of experience. The old man pulled up beside Marcus and killed his engine. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, 2 strangers meeting on a lonely stretch of highway, connected by nothing but their love of motorcycles and the random chance of fate. "Engine trouble?" the old man asked. His voice was rough, like gravel rolling in a tin can, but there was warmth beneath the roughness. Marcus nodded, feeling suddenly embarrassed. Here he was, a mechanical engineering graduate, unable to fix his own motorcycle. "Yes, sir. She just died on me about 20 minutes ago. I have checked everything I know to check, but I cannot figure out what is wrong." The old man swung his leg over his bike and walked toward the Titan Eagle. His movements were slow but deliberate, each step carrying the weight of years. He ran his hand along the fuel tank, almost lovingly, as if greeting an old friend. "A 72 Eagle," he said quietly. "Do not see many of these anymore. Most of them ended up in junkyards or private collections. How did you come by her? Marcus explained about the widow, about his savings, about his dream. The old man listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving the motorcycle. When Marcus finished, the old man nodded slowly, as if something had been confirmed. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the engine. "Of course, I would appreciate any help you can give." The old man knelt beside the bike, his knees creaking in protest. He studied the engine for a long moment, his fingers tracing the lines and curves of the machinery with an intimacy that surprised Marcus. It was like watching a surgeon examine a patient or a musician tune an instrument. There was knowledge there, deep and instinctive, the kind that could not be learned from books. "Your problem is not mechanical," the old man said finally. "It is electrical. There is a secondary ignition wire that runs behind the cylinder head. On the 72 models, they used a slightly different routing than the later versions. That wire tends to come loose when the engine gets hot, especially on days like this." He reached deep into the engine compartment, his arm disappearing up to the elbow, and Marcus heard a soft click. The old man withdrew his hand, now smeared with grease, and smiled. "Try her now!" Marcus climbed onto the bike and turned the key. The engine roared to life immediately, purring like a contented cat. He could not believe it. He had spent 20 minutes checking everything, and this stranger had diagnosed the problem in 30 seconds. "How did you know that?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with genuine amazement. "I have studied motorcycle repair for 2 years, and I have never heard of that issue." The old man wiped his hands on a rag he produced from his jacket pocket. "Some things are not in the books, son. Some things you only learn by doing, by failing, by getting your hands dirty and your heart broken and your pride bruised. That is how real knowledge is born." Marcus nodded, absorbing the wisdom. "Can I buy you a drink or something? There is a place about a mile down the road. It is the least I can do to thank you." The old man considered the offer for a moment, then smiled. "I could use something cold. Lead the way." They rode together to the small roadside establishment, a weathered building with a faded sign that read, "Desert Rose Cafe." The parking lot was empty except for an old pickup truck and a sedan that had seen better days. Inside, the air conditioning hummed mercifully, and a ceiling fan turned lazy circles above a handful of tables. A woman in her 50s stood behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her apron stained with the evidence of a long day's work. She looked up when they entered, and her eyes widened with recognition when she saw the old man. "Well, I will be," she said softly. "Walter Kingston. I have not seen you in, 15 years? The old man, Walter, smiled and removed his goggles. "Hello, Rose. You are still here. I was not sure if this place would still be standing." "Still standing, still serving the best pie in 3 counties. Sit anywhere you like. I will bring you the usual." Marcus followed Walter to a booth by the window, his mind racing. Walter Kingston. The name tugged at something in his memory, something important, but he could not quite place it. He sat down across from the old man and studied his face, looking for clues. "You know this place?" Marcus asked. Walter nodded, gazing out the window at the highway. "I used to come here all the time, back in the day. Rose's husband, God rest his soul, was a good friend of mine. We used to test ride new designs on this stretch of road. It was perfect, long and straight with no traffic. You could really open up the throttle and see what a machine could do." "You designed motorcycles?" Walter turned back to Marcus, and there was something in his eyes, a mixture of pride and humility, joy and sadness. "I did more than design them, son. I built them. I dreamed them. I poured my life into them." The pieces began to fall into place in Marcus's mind. Walter Kingston, the secondary ignition wire, the intimate knowledge of the Titan Eagle, the way Rose had looked at him, like he was someone important, someone legendary. "Walter Kingston," Marcus said slowly, the realization dawning. "You are the Walter Kingston, the founder of Titan Motorcycles." Walter said nothing. He just smiled, that same quiet smile, and waited for Rose to bring their drinks. She set down 2 glasses of iced tea and a slice of apple pie, then retreated to the counter, giving them their privacy. "I thought you were dead," Marcus blurted out, then immediately regretted his words. "I am sorry, that came out wrong. I mean, I read that you retired decades ago and disappeared. No one knew what happened to you." "I did not disappear," Walter said, picking up his fork. "I just stopped being famous. There is a difference. When you build something that takes on a life of its own, sometimes the best thing you can do is step back and let it breathe. Titan did not need me anymore. It needed to find its own identity, separate from its creator." "But you are still riding." "Of course I am still riding. That is not something you stop doing. That is something that is in your blood, in your bones. The day I stop riding is the day they put me in the ground." Marcus thought about his own relationship with motorcycles, about the years of longing before he could afford one, about the feeling of freedom that came with every ride. He understood what Walter was saying, perhaps better than he understood most things. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "You can ask. I cannot promise I will answer." "Why did you help me? You could have just ridden by. Most people would have. It is hot, it is inconvenient, and you do not know me from Adam. Why did you stop?" Walter set down his fork and looked at Marcus with an intensity that made the young man uncomfortable. "Because I saw myself in you. Not the me of today, but the me of 60 years ago. The young man with the dream and the determination, stranded by circumstances beyond his control, waiting for someone to show him the way. Someone helped you? Someone saved me. His name was Earl Hutchins. He was a machinist from Detroit who had come out to California to escape the cold. He found me broken down on this very highway, not 2 miles from where I found you. He fixed my bike, bought me a meal, and then he said something I have never forgotten." Marcus leaned forward, hungry for the wisdom. "What did he say?" "He said that every great journey begins with a breakdown. Not a breakthrough, a breakdown. Because it is only when everything falls apart that you discover what you are truly made of. It is only when you are forced to stop that you can see where you need to go." The words settled into Marcus's mind like stones sinking into still water. He thought about his own journey, about the obstacles he had faced, about the moments when he had wanted to give up. And he realized that every single one of those moments had taught him something essential. "That is beautiful," Marcus said. "That is life," Walter corrected him. "Beauty is just a side effect." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. The light changed, shifting from amber to rose to a deep, rich purple that painted the desert in colors that seemed impossible. Marcus had never seen anything quite like it, and he found himself grateful for the breakdown that had led him to this moment. "What are your plans, son?" Walter asked eventually. "Where is life taking you?" Marcus hesitated. He had never told anyone his real dream, not even his closest friends. It seemed too big, too audacious, too likely to be crushed by reality. But something about Walter, something about this moment, made him brave. "I want to design motorcycles," he said. "Not just repair them or ride them. I want to create them. I want to build machines that make people feel the way I felt the first time I rode. I want to give someone else that feeling of freedom." Walter nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "And what is stopping you?" "Everything. I do not have the money. I do not have the connections. I do not have the experience. All I have is a degree from a community college and a dream that is probably too big for someone like me." "Someone like you," Walter repeated. "And what does that mean exactly? Someone young? Someone without resources? Someone without a fancy pedigree?" "All of the above," Walter laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to fill the entire cafe. "Son, let me tell you something about someone like you. When I started Titan Motorcycles, I was 18 years old with $127 in my pocket and a head full of ideas that everyone said were crazy. I did not have a degree. I did not have connections. I did not even have a proper workshop. I had a shed behind my grandmother's house and a burning desire to prove everyone wrong." Marcus stared at him, trying to reconcile this story with the legend he had grown up hearing about. But you are Walter Kingston. You built an empire. I built an empire because someone like me refused to believe that someone like me could not do it. The only difference between a dreamer and an achiever is the willingness to start, the willingness to fail, the willingness to get back up and try again, even when everyone is telling you that you are wasting your time. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Every week we share stories of ordinary people who discovered extraordinary courage at the moment they needed it most. If you believe that dreams are worth fighting for, then this is the community where you belong. Subscribe now, and let us continue this journey together. The conversation continued late into the evening, long past the time when Rose should have closed the cafe. She did not seem to mind. She sat behind the counter, pretending to read a magazine, but Marcus could tell she was listening to every word. There was something magical happening at that booth by the window, something that transcended ordinary conversation. Walter told Marcus about the early days of Titan motorcycles, about the struggles and the setbacks, about the moments when he came within inches of losing everything. He told him about the first motorcycle he ever sold, a custom job for a dentist from San Diego who wanted something that would make his friends jealous. He told him about the first time he saw one of his machines on a magazine cover and the strange feeling of pride and humility that had washed over him. But more than the stories of success, Walter shared the stories of failure. The prototype that exploded during a test ride, nearly killing him. The investor who promised funding and then disappeared with Walter's designs. The factory fire that destroyed 2 years of work in a single night. The lawsuit from a competitor that drained his resources and almost broke his spirit. Every one of those failures taught me something, Walter said. Every one of those setbacks made me stronger. The fire taught me the importance of backing up my designs. The investor taught me to trust my instincts about people. The explosion taught me to never cut corners on safety, no matter how tight the deadline. And the lawsuit? Walter's expression darkened for a moment, but then he smiled. The lawsuit taught me that success attracts enemies as surely as light attracts moths. When you build something great, there will always be people who want to tear it down. The question is not whether they will come for you. The question is whether you will still be standing when they do. Marcus thought about these words for a long time. He had never considered the negative aspects of success, the challenges that came with achieving your dreams. In his mind, success was the end of the struggle, not the beginning of a new one. You make it sound almost not worth it, he said finally. Not worth it? Walter shook his head firmly. It is worth everything. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every failure and heartbreak and disappointment. Because when you create something that matters, when you bring something into the world that did not exist before, you become part of something larger than yourself. You become part of the human story. He paused, his eyes distant. Do you know why I still ride even after all these years? It is not because I love the feel of the wind or the sound of the engine. I mean, I do love those things, but that is not why. I ride because every time I throw my leg over a motorcycle, I am connected to every other rider who has ever lived. I am connected to the first person who ever strapped an engine to 2 wheels and thought maybe this will work. I am connected to the millions of people who have found freedom and joy and purpose on the open road. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a realignment of his understanding. He had always thought of motorcycles as machines, as tools for transportation and recreation. But Walter was describing something deeper, something almost spiritual. That is why I want to design them, Marcus said quietly. I want to be part of that connection. I want to create something that gives other people what riding has given me. Walter studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the feeling that he was being evaluated, measured against some standard that only Walter understood. Finally, the old man nodded, as if he had made a decision. Come with me, he said, rising from the booth. There is something I want to show you. They left money on the table for Rose, who waved goodbye with a knowing smile and walked out into the cool desert night. The stars were brilliant overhead, unobscured by city lights, a million points of fire in the vast darkness. Walter led Marcus to his custom motorcycle and pulled a small notebook from his saddlebag. "This is something I have been working on for the past 5 years," he said, handing the notebook to Marcus. "It is a design for a new kind of motorcycle, not just a machine, but a philosophy, a way of thinking about what motorcycles can be." Marcus opened the notebook and found himself looking at detailed sketches and calculations, at diagrams and notes and ideas that spanned dozens of pages. He was not an expert, not yet, but he could recognize brilliance when he saw it. This was something revolutionary, something that could change the industry. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because I need someone to build it. I am too old, Marcus. My hands shake. My eyes are not what they used to be. I have the vision, but I no longer have the ability to bring it to life. I have been waiting for the right person, someone with the skills and the passion and the hunger to see this through. And you think that person is me? You just met me. You do not know anything about me." Walter smiled. "I know that you saved for 2 years to buy a 50-year-old motorcycle because you understood its significance. I know that you made a promise to a widow and you intend to keep it. I know that when your bike broke down, you did not call for help or give up. You were preparing to push it through the desert heat because that was what needed to be done. And I know that when you talk about designing motorcycles, your eyes light up in a way that cannot be faked." Marcus did not know what to say. This was beyond anything he could have imagined, beyond any dream he had ever dared to dream. He was being offered an opportunity by the greatest motorcycle designer in American history, a man he had thought was dead, a legend who had appeared out of nowhere to fix his bike and change his life. "I do not know if I am ready," Marcus admitted. "No one is ever ready. Ready is an illusion we use to avoid starting. The only way to become ready is to begin." They stood together in the starlight, the old man and the young man, the legend and the dreamer. Around them, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast canvas waiting to be painted. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its voice echoing across the empty landscape. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now you go home and think about what I have said. In 3 days, I want you to come to my workshop in Joshua Tree. The address is in the notebook. If you decide this is not for you, I will understand. But if you decide to take this journey with me, I can promise you 2 things. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done, and it will be the most rewarding." Marcus looked down at the notebook in his hands, feeling its weight, understanding that it represented so much more than paper and ink. It represented a legacy, a responsibility, a dream that had been waiting 60 years to find its new champion. "I will be there," he said. Walter nodded, satisfied. He climbed onto his motorcycle and pulled on his goggles. 3 days, son. Do not be late." And with that, he started his engine, turned onto the highway, and disappeared into the night, leaving Marcus standing alone beneath the stars with a notebook that contained the secrets of a legend and the promise of a future he was only beginning to understand. The drive back to Los Angeles took Marcus 4 hours, but he barely noticed the time passing. His mind was consumed with the encounter, with Walter's words, with the notebook that sat in his saddlebag like a ticking bomb of potential. He replayed the conversation over and over, searching for hidden meanings, for clues about what was expected of him. By the time he pulled into the parking lot of his small apartment complex, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He was exhausted, but sleep seemed impossible. His entire life had shifted in the space of a single evening, and he needed time to process what had happened. His apartment was modest, a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor with a view of the parking lot and a kitchen that was barely large enough to turn around in. But it was his, paid for with his own money, and that meant something. On the walls hung posters of classic motorcycles, images he had collected over the years from magazines and websites. Among them, prominently displayed above his desk, was a black and white photograph of Walter Kingston standing beside the very first Titan Eagle, taken in 1963. Marcus stood in front of that photograph for a long time, studying the young man in the image. He looked so different from the weathered figure Marcus had met on the highway, so full of youthful energy and boundless optimism. but the eyes were the same. That intensity, that fire, that unshakable belief in the power of dreams. He opened the notebook and began to read more carefully, taking his time with each page. The designs were unlike anything he had seen before, a fusion of classic aesthetics and modern engineering that seemed almost impossible. Walter had somehow managed to solve problems that had plagued motorcycle designers for decades, creating solutions that were elegant in their simplicity. But more than the technical innovations, what struck Marcus was the philosophy behind them. Walter had written extensively about his vision for the future of motorcycles, about the need to reconnect riders with the pure joy of the road. He believed that modern motorcycles had become too complicated, too focused on technology and gadgets, losing sight of what made riding special in the first place. A motorcycle should be an extension of the rider, one passage read, not a distraction from the ride. Every unnecessary feature is a barrier between the human spirit and the freedom of the road. Strip away the excess, and what remains is essence, and essence is everything. Marcus read those words 3 times before setting down the notebook. He understood what Walter was saying, not just intellectually, but in his bones. He had felt that essence the first time he rode the Titan Eagle, that pure connection between man and machine that transcended explanation. And he knew, with sudden clarity, that he wanted to spend his life pursuing that feeling, chasing that essence, and helping others find it too. The next 3 days were the longest of Marcus's life. He went through the motions of his normal routine, going to work at the auto parts store, eating meals he did not taste, sleeping in fitful spurts that left him more tired than rested. But his mind was elsewhere, constantly turning over the decision that lay before him. He thought about the risks, leaving his stable job, betting everything on a dream that might not pan out, trusting a stranger he had just met even if that stranger was a legend. There were so many things that could go wrong, so many ways this could end in disappointment and failure. But then he thought about the alternative. Staying where he was, spending the next 40 years selling auto parts and dreaming about what might have been, growing old with a heart full of regret and a mind full of questions that would never be answered. On the morning of the 3rd day, Marcus packed a bag, called his boss to resign, and got on his motorcycle. He did not know what the future held, but he knew that he could not live with himself if he did not try. Some opportunities only come once, and this was one of them. The drive to Joshua Tree took him through some of the most beautiful landscape in California. He passed through mountain passes and desert valleys, through small towns that seemed frozen in time and stretches of highway, where the only company was the occasional tumbling tumbleweed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, the temperature rose, and Marcus felt the familiar joy of the open road seeping into his bones. He found the address around noon, a compound of buildings set back from the main road, surrounded by a high fence and a grove of Joshua trees that gave the area its name. There was no sign, no indication of what lay behind the fence, just a simple gate with an intercom box. Marcus pressed the button and waited. A moment later, Walter's gravel voice crackled through the speaker. "You are early. That is a good sign. Come in." The gate swung open, and Marcus rode through. What he saw on the other side took his breath away. The compound was a motorcycle enthusiast's paradise. There were several large buildings, each one clearly dedicated to a different aspect of design and manufacturing. Marcus could see through the windows of one building where gleaming machines stood in various stages of completion. Another building appeared to house a testing facility with ramps and tracks and equipment for evaluating performance. And in the center of it all, like the heart of the operation, stood a modest house with a wraparound porch and a view of the desert that stretched for miles. Walter was waiting on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked different in the daylight, older and more fragile, but his eyes were still sharp, still filled with that undeniable fire. "What do you think?" he asked as Marcus dismounted and removed his helmet. "I think this is incredible. I had no idea any of this was here. That is the point. When I retired, I did not want attention. I did not want journalists and fans and investors crawling all over my property. So I built this place, off the grid and off the radar. This is where I have been working for the past 30 years, continuing my research, refining my designs, waiting for the right moment." And that moment is now? Walter nodded. That moment is now. Come inside. We have a lot to discuss. The house was modest compared to the surrounding facilities, decorated in a style that was simple and functional. There were photographs on the walls, images from Walter's life and career, but they were not displayed ostentatiously. They were simply there, memories frozen in time, reminders of a journey that had spanned more than 6 decades. Walter led Marcus to a study at the back of the house, a room filled with books and blueprints and models of motorcycles that had never been built. He sat down behind a large wooden desk and gestured for Marcus to take a seat across from him. Before we go any further, I need to know something, Walter said. Why are you here? Not the romantic version, not the dream speech, the real reason. What do you actually want? Marcus thought carefully before answering. He had been asked this question many times, in job interviews and casual conversations, and he had always given the expected response. But he sensed that Walter would not accept anything less than the truth. I want to matter, he said finally. I want to create something that outlasts me, something that makes a difference in the world even after I am gone. I do not want to be just another person who lived and died and was forgotten. I want to leave a mark. Walter nodded slowly. That is honest, and honesty is the foundation of everything we will do together. There will be times when honesty is uncomfortable, when it would be easier to lie or to hide or to pretend. But we cannot afford those luxuries, not if we want to create something real. I understand. Good. Then let me be honest with you. This project is my legacy. It is the culmination of everything I have learned in 60 years of designing motorcycles. If we succeed, it will change the industry. If we fail, it will be the end of everything I have worked for. I am not exaggerating when I say that this is the most important thing I have ever done. Marcus felt the weight of those words settling onto his shoulders. He had expected pressure, but this was something more. This was responsibility on a scale he had never imagined. Why me? He asked again. There must be thousands of designers who would kill for this opportunity. People with experience and credentials and proven track records. Why choose someone who has never designed anything? Walter smiled. Because experience and credentials and track records are exactly what I do not need. Those things come with baggage, assumptions, limitations. I need someone who can look at a problem with fresh eyes, who can imagine solutions that experienced designers would never consider. I need someone who is hungry, who has something to prove, who will work harder than anyone else because they understand what is at stake. He paused, his eyes meeting Marcus's directly. But more than any of that, I need someone I can trust. Someone who will carry this vision forward after I am gone. Someone who will protect it, nurture it, and bring it to life in a way that honors everything it represents. And you think I am that person? I think you could be. That is all any of us can say about anyone. Potential is just possibility. What matters is what you do with it. That is the question every dreamer must answer. What will you do with your potential? What will you do with the gifts you have been given, the opportunities that fall into your lap, the moments that change the trajectory of your life? Take a moment now to leave a comment with this phrase: I have a dream worth fighting for. Because if you are still watching, if you are still here, then I know that somewhere inside you, there is a dream waiting to be born. And I want you to know that you are not alone. The days that followed were the most challenging of Marcus's life. Walter was a demanding teacher, expecting perfection and accepting nothing less. He pushed Marcus to his limits and then pushed further, forcing him to confront his weaknesses and develop strengths he did not know he possessed. They started with the fundamentals. Walter believed that before you could design a motorcycle, you had to understand every aspect of how they worked. So Marcus spent hours in the workshop, disassembling engines and studying their components, learning the language of gears and pistons and valves. He memorized specifications and tolerances, calculated stresses and forces, and gradually built a mental model of the motorcycle that was detailed enough to manipulate in his imagination. A designer who does not understand mechanics is like a writer who does not understand grammar, Walter explained. You might produce something that looks good, but it will not function properly. Form must always follow function. Marcus absorbed everything like a sponge. He took notes constantly, filling notebook after notebook with observations and insights. He asked questions that sometimes made Walter smile and sometimes made him frown, but he never stopped asking. He understood that this was a once-in-a-lifetime education, and he was determined to make the most of every moment. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn surrendered to the cool embrace of winter. The desert landscape changed, becoming stark and beautiful in its emptiness. Marcus grew comfortable with the rhythms of life at the compound, the early mornings and late nights, the endless cycle of learning and creating. He also grew closer to Walter. Beneath the demanding exterior, Marcus discovered a man of profound depth and compassion. Walter had lived an extraordinary life, but it had not been without its share of pain. He had lost friends and family, had survived challenges that would have broken lesser men, and yet he had emerged with his spirit intact, his passion undimmed, his faith in the power of dreams unshaken. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Walter spoke about his late wife, Eleanor. She had been his partner in everything, his confidant and his anchor, the person who kept him grounded when success threatened to go to his head. She had passed away 10 years earlier, and Walter still spoke of her with a tenderness that brought tears to his eyes. "She was the one who told me to keep going," he said. "When I wanted to retire for good, when I thought there was nothing left for me to give, she reminded me that the work was not finished. She said that somewhere out there was someone who needed what I knew, someone who would carry the torch forward. She sounds remarkable. She was everything. And she was right. She always was." Walter turned to Marcus, and there was something in his eyes that Marcus had not seen before. Vulnerability. "I think she would have liked you. She had a talent for seeing potential in people, for recognizing diamonds in the rough." Marcus did not know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and let the silence speak for itself. Some moments do not require words. Some moments are complete in their stillness. As the months progressed, Marcus began to take on more responsibility. He moved from learning to contributing, from observing to creating. Under Walter's guidance, he started developing his own designs, exploring ideas that built on the foundation of the master's work, while adding his own unique perspective. It was not easy. For every idea that worked, there were 10 that failed. Marcus experienced frustration and disappointment on a scale he had never known. There were moments when he doubted himself, when he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, when the weight of expectations felt too heavy to bear. But he kept going. He remembered what Walter had told him that first night on the highway, that every great journey begins with a breakdown. He reminded himself that failure was not the end, but the beginning, that each setback was an opportunity to learn and grow. And slowly, steadily, he began to find his voice as a designer. The breakthrough came on a cold January morning, when Marcus was working on a particularly challenging aspect of the new motorcycle suspension system. He had been struggling with the problem for weeks, trying different approaches and hitting dead ends at every turn. But on that morning, something clicked. He saw the solution clearly, as if a fog had lifted from his mind, and he knew immediately that it would work. He ran to find Walter, bursting into the older man's study with the design clutched in his hands. Walter looked at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a slow, satisfied smile that transformed his weathered face. "This is it," he said. "This is exactly what I have been hoping for. You have taken what I taught you and made it your own. You have found your voice." Marcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Pride, certainly, but also something deeper. Gratitude for the opportunity. Recognition that he was part of something larger than himself. Understanding that this was just the beginning of a journey that would last the rest of his life. "What now?" he asked. "Now we build it. We take these designs and turn them into reality. We create something that has never existed before." The construction phase was a different kind of challenge. Designing on paper was one thing, bringing that design to life was another entirely. Marcus learned about materials and manufacturing, about supply chains and quality control, about the thousand small decisions that could mean the difference between success and failure. Walter brought in a team of skilled craftsmen, men and women who had worked with him over the years and shared his commitment to excellence. They were skeptical of Marcus at first, this young newcomer who had appeared out of nowhere to take on such an important role. But as they worked together, as they saw his dedication and his talent, their skepticism turned to respect. The motorcycle began to take shape. It was beautiful, unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The lines were clean and flowing, the proportions perfect. Every component was crafted with precision and care, every detail considered and reconsidered until it was exactly right. It was art as much as engineering, a fusion of form and function that embodied everything Walter believed about what motorcycles could be. Spring arrived, bringing warmth and new life to the desert. The Joshua trees bloomed, their strange flowers reaching toward the sky. The air was filled with the scent of sage and juniper, and the sunsets were more spectacular than ever. Marcus felt like he was living in a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream that he never wanted to end. But he knew that it could not last forever. Walter was getting older, his health declining despite his best efforts to hide it. There were days when he could not make it to the workshop, when the effort of walking from the house to the facilities was too much for him. On those days, Marcus would sit with him on the porch, reading from the notebooks or simply keeping him company. One afternoon, as they sat together watching a hawk circle overhead, Walter spoke about the future. "The motorcycle will be finished soon," he said, "and when it is, I want you to take it into the world. I want you to show people what we have created. I want you to carry the torch that I can no longer carry." "You make it sound like you are not going to be there." Walter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "I am not going to pretend, Marcus. I know what is happening to my body. I know that time is running out. But I am not afraid. I have lived a full life. I have created things that matter, and I have found someone to continue the work." Marcus felt his eyes filling with tears, but he forced them back. This was not the time for weakness. This was the time for strength. "I will not let you down," he said. "I know you will not. That is why I chose you." The final weeks of construction were bittersweet. Marcus worked with an intensity he had never known, pouring everything he had into the project. He wanted it to be perfect, not just for himself, but for Walter, for the legacy they were building together. Every weld, every fitting, every adjustment was made with care and precision. The day the motorcycle was finished, they rolled it out of the workshop and into the sunlight. It gleamed in the afternoon brightness, a testament to months of labor and years of vision. Marcus could barely breathe as he looked at it, as he realized what they had accomplished. Walter was there, seated in a wheelchair because he could no longer stand for extended periods. But his eyes were bright, and his smile was the biggest Marcus had ever seen. "It is beautiful," Walter said. "It is exactly what I imagined." "It is yours," Marcus replied. "It will always be yours." Walter shook his head. "No, son, it is ours, and soon it will belong to the world. That is how it should be. That is what motorcycles are for." They took photographs that afternoon, documenting the moment for posterity. Marcus stood beside the motorcycle, his hand resting on the fuel tank, feeling the warmth of the metal beneath his palm. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment, the breakdown on the highway, the chance meeting with a legend, the months of learning and growing and becoming. He thought about the future, about the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. There would be difficulties, he knew. There would be obstacles and setbacks and moments of doubt. But he was ready. He had been trained by the best. He had found his purpose, his passion, his place in the world. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning. The launch of the new motorcycle was scheduled for a major industry event in Las Vegas, 6 months after its completion. In the interim, Marcus worked tirelessly to prepare, studying marketing and public relations, practicing presentations, and learning everything he could about how to introduce a new product to the world. Walter helped when he could, offering advice and encouragement, sharing wisdom accumulated over decades in the industry. But his health continued to decline, and there were more bad days than good. Marcus made sure to spend as much time with him as possible, knowing that these moments were precious and limited. 2 weeks before the launch event, on a quiet Sunday morning, Walter passed away in his sleep. He went peacefully, without pain, surrounded by the things he loved. Marcus was by his side, holding his hand when he took his final breath. The grief was overwhelming. Marcus had known this day was coming, had prepared himself as best he could, but nothing could have truly readied him for the reality. He had lost a mentor, a friend, a second father. The world felt empty without Walter in it, the colors duller, the sounds muted. But even in his grief, Marcus knew what he had to do. Walter had entrusted him with a mission, and he was not going to fail. He channeled his sorrow into determination, his loss into purpose. He would honor Walter's memory by completing what they had started together. The launch event was a triumph. The new motorcycle, named the Titan Phoenix in honor of rebirth and renewal, captured the imagination of the industry and the public alike. Critics praised its innovative design, its perfect blend of classic aesthetics and modern engineering. Riders who tested it reported an experience unlike anything they had felt before, a connection to the machine that was almost spiritual. Marcus stood on the stage at the launch event, looking out at the crowd of journalists and executives and enthusiasts. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from a breakdown on a dusty highway to the pinnacle of his profession. He thought about Walter, about the wisdom and generosity and faith that had made this moment possible. And he told their story. He told the crowd about the chance meeting, about the lessons learned, about the vision they had shared and brought to life. He spoke about passion and persistence, about the importance of mentorship, about the legacy that one person can leave for another. By the time he finished, there were tears in many eyes, including his own. "This motorcycle is not just a machine," Marcus said in conclusion. "It is a promise that the dreams of one generation can be passed to the next, a promise that passion never dies, even when the people who hold it do. And a promise that every one of us, no matter where we come from or what obstacles we face, has the potential to create something that matters." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus barely heard it. He was thinking about Walter, about the man who had stopped on a highway to help a stranger, who had seen potential where others might have seen nothing, who had given everything he had to ensure that the work would continue. Someday, Marcus knew, he would find someone else. Someone young and hungry and full of dreams, someone whose bike would break down at exactly the right moment, someone who would ask for help without knowing who they were asking. And when that day came, he would do what Walter had done. He would stop. He would help. He would pass on the torch. Because that is what mentors do. That is what legacies are for. That is how dreams survive the dreamers and become part of the permanent fabric of the world. The years that followed the launch were a whirlwind of activity and achievement. The Titan Phoenix became a phenomenon, exceeding every expectation and establishing Marcus as a major force in the motorcycle industry. Orders poured in from around the world, and production had to be scaled up repeatedly to meet demand. But Marcus never forgot where he came from. He kept Walter's notebooks in a place of honor in his office, consulting them regularly for guidance and inspiration. He maintained the compound in Joshua Tree, using it as a research and development facility where new ideas could be explored without the pressure of commercial deadlines. And he established the Walter Kingston Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to mentoring young designers and engineers from disadvantaged backgrounds. The foundation became his particular passion. He spent countless hours reviewing applications, conducting interviews, and selecting candidates for the mentorship program. He remembered how Walter had taken a chance on him, had seen something in a young man stranded on the highway, and he was determined to pay that forward. One of his first mentees was a young woman named Sarah, who reminded him of himself in many ways. She had grown up in foster care, had struggled to complete her education, and had faced obstacles that would have defeated most people. But she had a fire in her, a determination that could not be extinguished, and Marcus recognized it immediately. Over the years, he guided her development just as Walter had guided his. He taught her the technical skills she needed, but more importantly, he taught her to believe in herself. He showed her that her background was not a limitation, but a source of strength, that the challenges she had overcome had prepared her for challenges yet to come. Sarah went on to become a brilliant designer in her own right, creating motorcycles that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. She credited Marcus for everything, but he always deflected the praise, pointing instead to Walter and the chain of mentorship that connected them all. "We are all links in a chain," he told her once. "The chain stretches back into the past and forward into the future. Our job is not to be the strongest link, but to make sure the chain remains unbroken." Sarah nodded, understanding. "And someday I will find my own link." "You will. When the time is right, the universe has a way of bringing the right people together." As Marcus grew older, he thought often about the nature of legacy. He had achieved success beyond anything he could have imagined, had created things that would outlast him, had touched countless lives through his work and his philanthropy. But he understood now that legacy was not about monuments or achievements. It was about relationships. It was about the impact you had on individual people, the ways you changed their lives for the better. Walter's legacy lived on in him. His legacy would live on in Sarah and the other mentees he had guided. And their legacies would live on in the people they would mentor, stretching forward into a future that none of them could see. It was a beautiful thought, humbling and inspiring in equal measure. He continued to ride, of course. Some things you never stop doing. Every Sunday, weather permitting, he would take his motorcycle out on the open road, feeling the wind against his face and the engine beneath him. Sometimes he rode alone, lost in thought. Sometimes he rode with friends, sharing the joy of the journey. And sometimes, on special occasions, he would ride to the spot on Route 66 where he had broken down all those years ago, where a stranger had stopped to help and everything had changed. He would park his bike and stand by the side of the highway, looking at the desert landscape and remembering. He could still see Walter's face, weathered by sun and wind, could still hear his gravel voice offering wisdom that would shape the rest of his life. The memory never faded, never lost its power. One Sunday, when Marcus was in his 60s, he was riding along that same stretch of highway when he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. A young man was standing beside a broken-down motorcycle, looking frustrated and helpless under the blazing sun. Marcus slowed his bike and pulled over. The young man looked up at him with a mixture of hope and embarrassment, and Marcus felt a wave of recognition wash over him. Not recognition of the young man's face, but recognition of the moment. Recognition of the opportunity that the universe had just placed in his path. "Engine trouble?" Marcus asked. The young man nodded. "Yes, sir. She just died on me about 20 minutes ago. I have checked everything I know to check, but I cannot figure out what is wrong." Marcus smiled. "May I take a look?" He knelt beside the motorcycle and began to examine the engine, his hands moving with the confidence of decades of experience. And as he worked, he thought about Walter, about the chain of mentorship that connected past to present to future, about the simple act of stopping to help a stranger and how it could change the course of a life. Some stories come full circle. Some moments echo across time, and some opportunities are too important to pass by. "My name is Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "What is yours?" The young man shook his hand firmly. "I am David. Thank you for stopping. Most people would have just driven by." "Well, David, let me tell you something that someone once told me. Every great journey begins with a breakdown. Not a breakthrough, a breakdown. Because it is only when everything falls apart that you discover what you are truly made of." David looked at him curiously, not understanding the significance of the words. But that was okay. Understanding would come later, when the seeds that were being planted today had time to grow. Marcus fixed the motorcycle, just as Walter had fixed his all those years ago. And then, just as Walter had done, he invited David to join him for a drink at a roadside cafe. They talked for hours, about motorcycles and dreams and the meaning of success. And by the time they parted ways, Marcus knew that he had found his next mentee, the next link in the chain. The cycle continued. The legacy endured. And somewhere, Marcus was sure, Walter was smiling. If you have watched this far, It is because this story touched something inside you. It is because you understand what it means to dream, to struggle, to persevere, and to find purpose in unexpected places. I want to get to know you, to know who really connects with these stories. So please leave a comment saying, "I watched this far." Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Click the like button if this story moved you. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel so we can continue this journey together. Because the most important stories are the ones we share, and the most important legacies are the ones we build together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And remember, every great journey begins with a breakdown. The question is, what will you do next?